trusting your gut does not account for what we call cognitive bias. Like, yes, it's bad enough that you're just trusting your emotions, but there's actual science that shows that the human brain leaps to conclusions.
Yes.
And then after it's leaped to a conclusion enough times, it just wires itself that way. So, I mean, you see this every time you talk to somebody who's like hyper-religious or somebody who's hyper-political. There's no space for any kind of new information because they just leap to a conclusion. That is essentially trusting your gut.
I see this with one of the worst examples I've seen recently is a doctor made a video. I don't do a lot of social media, but I saw that someone sent this to me on Instagram. A doctor made a video about, and I can't remember what it was, but it's not relevant. It was just something like, hey, here's a medical thing that you might not know about your child. And a lot of the top comments were, no way, my mama gut says this, and I will always do that. Mama knows best. And I'm like, you are arguing with a doctor, a physician, an MD, and she is saying, don't do this, this is bad. And it's like, well, my mama knows best. Why would you know best? You gave birth to this person. Good, you have a good baseline on your kid, as per our previous conversation. That does not indicate whatsoever that you are qualified to give medical advice or even make a really good medical decision.
Yeah.
It's terrifying to see stuff like that.
And it happens all the time. And what's worse is because we live in an age where information is so available, it gets reinforced. Because now in your algorithm looks for how you respond to things, and then it feeds you more of what you already believe. So you end up in this echo chamber that gets smaller and smaller and more hyper niche to you. And then we all end up wondering how that other person ended up so crazy before we think, oh wait, maybe I'm equally as crazy in my own echo chamber of what social media and entertainment is telling me.
I know fear has some wisdom in it. We've talked about the gift of fear with Gavin DeBecker, and you know who he is?
Yep.
Yeah. Most of the time, though, it's just a bad idea to go with subjective emotion, right? It seems like... Do you train that out of people at the CIA? Is that something they train out of you?
You know, it's funny. The answer is no, because the gift of fear is very real.
Oh, not the gift. Sorry.
No, I'm with you. I know what you're saying.
Okay,
I know what you're saying. But here's what I'm saying, right? The gift of fear is very real. So you don't ever want to undermine the value of that gift.
Yes. Okay.
Because that's what keeps us alive.
Right.
Not only what keeps us alive, but oftentimes when it comes to a field operation, you're keeping yourself alive and the other people on your team. So you want everybody to have the gift of fear. But what we try to do is we try to reprogram how the brain and body connection reacts to fear. So I'm going to try and do this in like a Reader's Digest version. Fear always comes from an external stimulus. So if you picture like a diagram of like connecting lines, you've got an external stimulus that is picked up by one of your five senses: sight, sound, touch, taste, feel, right? So somewhere in there, one of your five senses picks up on this external stimulus that is then just information, not an emotion, just information is then sent to both your left and right hemisphere simultaneously. Your left hemisphere of your brain is your emotional center. Your left is your logical center. Your right is your emotional center. So
Is that real? I thought that was sort of like not a thing, the left and right.
Left and right is totally real.
The left and right hemispheres are, but is it true that our emotions are really located in one hemisphere?
That's not. I mean, scientifically, they cross-pollinate, and there's like central nodes inside the brain. So it's just
okay.
But as an example, there's essentially two pathways through the brain that are conveniently described as left and right. But the pathway of your brain that is emotional, when it sees the stimulus through the five senses, the emotional part of your brain immediately triggers your survival instinct, right? Fight or flight, threat or non-threat, really, right? And then it can immediately tell your amygdala, which is the physiological response of your body, how to react, because it's a one-step connection, right? It's literally stimulus goes to brain reacts emotionally, fight or flight, tells body, sweat, panic, increase your heart rate, get ready to run. That's your emotional pathway. Your logical pathway has two extra steps. The information comes in, the information is shared with your brain, but the first thing your brain does is it says, have I seen this before? So it goes against an index of previous experiences. And then after it processes through that index and it says, yes, I have seen this before, or no, I haven't seen it before, it then goes to another part of your rational brain that says, when I saw this before, or when I've seen something like this before, what was the outcome? Well, then it comes up with a response that is measured and rational, and then it goes to the amygdala, and then it tells the body how to react. So what I'm saying there is that the left and right brain are the emotional pathway and the logical pathway in response to the same fear stimulus. One happens faster than the other. So have you ever had a moment where you've been startled by something in the corner?
Of course, yeah.
You see something,
Socks on your floor or whatever.
and you think it's a snake or a rat. You startle, but then like a half a second later, you're like, oh, it's just socks.
Right.
And then you come down. Well, the startle is a physiological response. You actually had an increase in your heart rate and your blood pressure, right? You had a very real physical response, physiological response. And then when you came down, you had a very real physical response. That is exactly what's happening. So that is the gift of fear. The gift of fear is the startle that could have kept you alive if it was actually a rat. So what CIA trains us to do, this is a lot longer than Reader's Digest, and I can tell it from your face.
No, I'm all paranoid, like, how many of my kids' drawings are on camera?
What CIA trains you to do is slow down the emotional side of your thinking and speed up the rational side of your thinking so that you startle less and you rationalize more, but the impact to your amygdala, it levels out your physiological response. So now when you see something in the corner of your house, you still see it, but you don't panic. Instead, you see it and you're like, what's that in the corner of the house? Right? That's what it's all about. And that's exactly how you train a very successful case officer. It's how you train a very successful field operator. That's how you train a successful shooter. You train them to not have a spike in their physiological response to a true fear stimulus.
How do CIA agents develop assets in other countries? You know, if you let's say you're stationed in Panama or whatever, like where I was, you're going to meet somebody, you know that they're a narco trafficker because you've got background information on people that are going to be at the party at the Australian embassy or whatever it is. And you just know he's a real estate developer, right? A lot of these guys do, but he's a narco. How do you start to develop a relationship with this person?
It's a great question. There's an actual process that we're taught, and it's a process very similar to the sales cycle, very similar to like a leadership cycle, very similar to a social cycle about how you make a friend or how you gain someone's trust or how you make someone take action and buy your product. Espionage is really nothing more than the selling of treachery. That's all espionage is, right? You're just pitching somebody on the idea of giving away secrets in exchange for something else. It's very much a sales pitch, right? So the process to develop the asset is it's an acronym that we call SADRAT, S-A-D-R-A-T. As funny
Great
as that
acronym.
is.
Yeah.
It's a government acronym.
Yikes.
But the SADRAT acronym stands for Spot, Assess, Develop, Recruit, Handle. Even though handle starts with an H, it's a government acronym.
I gotcha, yeah.
And T is terminate. This process, S-A-D-R-A-T, is just the process that's always happening. So you spot a target, you assess the target for whether or not they have access to information and whether or not they're susceptible to potential espionage. Because remember, if they have access but they can't be turned, you don't want to waste your time. If they don't have access and they look like they're going to be easy to turn, they're not going to be helpful. So you're looking for that right person who both has access to secrets and is willing to share those secrets. So the A is very important. And then you go into the term develop, which is the term you use. How do you develop the asset? Develop is a very specific term that we use that talks about cultivating and training and exchanging information and testing core behaviors to make sure that that person can truly engage in a secret relationship that nobody else knows about. If you apply SADRAT to like getting married, it makes a lot of sense. You spot a lot of potential partners. You assess potential partners against, could I live with them? Could they live with me? Could they raise children? Could they be financially responsible? And then you kind of whittle it down to the ones who are yes to all of those. But that's not where you stop. Then you actually date them for a while. You test them for a while. You see how do they handle when I'm sick with food poisoning? How do they handle when we travel overseas? That's all part of the D in develop, because you're developing a relationship that ends, like the development period ends, when you actually ask the question, will you marry me? When they say yes, they are now recruited. And then when they're recruited, everything changes.
Right.
That's why it's so much fun to like be dating, and it's not fun at all to be engaged.
The sad part is the happy part.
Yeah.
And the rat part, not always smooth sailing.
Right. So in the recruitment phase, now it's like they said yes, you said yes, you're in a relationship that is intentionally there to exchange secrets. Well, now there has to be like rules, and there have to be actions that are consistent, and there's responsibility and obligation and all this other stuff. And then through the entirety of that relationship, you are in the handling phase. Handling is really more like what we joke about with marriage, where most husbands joke that happy wife, happy life.
Yeah.
It's kind of real, but it's also, we joke about it because what we're really saying is we have to meet our wife's expectations to keep her happy.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm the one being handled, which is why this doesn't always hold up. The analogy doesn't always hold up. Yeah.
Correct. Well, that's how most husbands are. And we think that we're the developing officer until we actually get married, and then we all realize we're being handled.
Yeah, being played by a double agent.
That's how it works. And then, but the place where I hope you and I never get to is the T, the terminate. Because in a true clandestine relationship, when the asset is no longer useful, you don't want to continue having meetings with that asset. So you terminate the relationship, not terminate the person, just terminate the relationship. And that means you find a reason to stop talking. And in marriage terms, that would be like your typical divorce or your separation. It's like, hey, you no longer serve me, so I'm going to let you go so I can go right back to the spot part of SADRAT.